Hemshech Samech Vav, the 6th of Shvat, page Kuf Vav.
So sort of the mile of Yom Kippur over Shabbos. So Shabbos was the Indian from Tainug, but it was a Tainug Murkav, which comes be Harkova be'achilu u'shtia. Ma'ashen at Yom Kippurim, we saw as Lagamre the mile from any slabshus, no Tainug ha'atzma, Aposhut, and therefore we saw that on Yom Kippur there was Slichas Avenes, the whole inyan which comes al idei the avodah davka b'tshuva, and that's what we began the new section. How is it shayah that the inyan from Yom Kippur should be oile into such a madrega like Gabi Shabbos because of the inyan from tshuva. And that's where we're holding at the Mila from Veda Satshuva, which reaches the Etzim Tainug HaPashut. Va'inyan Dehine Omar Azal, it's put down in the Gemara, B'mokim, Shebali Teshuva Eindim, Tzadikim Gemurim, that's Rosh Hashanah Tzadikim Gemurim, Einan Yecholim Lamei. That's a Gemara Masechta Brachas in Daf Lamed Dalet, and the emphasis that over there it's a difference of opinion between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Avu as to whether we say that Tzadikim Gemurim are greater than the Baalei Tshuva, or whether we say that Baalei Tshuva are greater than the Tzadikim Gemurim. It's a difference of opinion, and both bring psukim, different inyanim, to support their theses, and also the Lashon that Chassidus usually quotes the opinion of Rabbi Avu. He's the one who holds that the Baalei Tshuva higher than the Tzadikim. Is over there it's written that the Mokim Baalei Tshuva Oimdim Ein Tzadikim Gemurim Oimdim. This is written in the Gemara. And always the Chassidus quotes, if I'm not mistaken, the Rebbe Melech Moshe has got a Mokim or observation in one of the places where he says that there's some Gilsa which maybe backs this. However, in the Gemara it's not written that the Tzadikim Gemurim are not able to stand there. It's just written that they don't stand there. And Chassidus always quotes it as being the Kavanah that the Tzadikim Gemurim Einan Yecholim Lameicham. They can't possibly stand there. Not just they don't, but they're not able to. But that tends to indicate absolute difference between the Baalei Tshuva and the Tzadikim. If I just say the Mokim Shein Tzadikim, V'onishe Baalei Tshuva Oimdim Ein Tzadikim Oimdim, then that means that right now in their madrega where they are, Binyan said they're not standing there, but maybe there's a certain kiruv ha'erech, a certain possibility that they could stand there. Bisman zeh or Binyan zeh, or even clearly they don't. But if you say that the Tzadikim Gemurim Einam Yecholim Lamei in the place of Baalei Tshuva, that tends to indicate that no matter how much the Tzadikim Koloid, that they're still in the Madrega of Tzadikim, I feel that Tzadikim Gemurim, with all the milas and all the perfection of a Tzadik, that they wouldn't be able to reach the Madrega of the Baalei Tshuva. So it's possible that that's why the Rebbeim always quote that Maimon Chazal, the Lashon of Einam Yecholim La'amoid, because that's the way they understand Rabbi Avu's opinion. That's the way they are understood. he meant to differ with Rabbi Yochanan, not just in a relative way, but in a absolute way. That the Madrega of Tzadikim and of Bali Tshuva are essentially separated absolutely in a von ein Arei Zeller, they're clouds. And therefore, if you're a tzaddik, you're not able to stand in the Maila, the Doila of the Madrega of the Bali Tshuva, and that's a Maila which separates them in a way of incomparably higher than the tzaddikim Agemurim. Therefore, we can say that's the reason why the Rabbeim always quoted in that Lashon, even though that's not written in Gemara clearly, that that's the way they understand the Pirush of the two opinions. However, it's very interesting that Barev Sifrei Achsidus, Lav Davki Sifrei Achsidus Chabad, but Barev Sifrei Talmidei Baal Shem Tov, from this man of Baal Shem Tov even further, and maybe even in certain great Shvatim even prior to that, all opinions tend to quote Rabbi Avu as being like the finality of the Gemara. They don't bring so much the difference of opinion, they just bring it as a Dover Poshut almost, that the Bali Tshuva are in an incomparably high Madrega than the Tzadikim Afila, Tzadikim Gemurim. It's well known, the Biur in Tanya, the Tzadik Gomer, that he's a Tzadik in the highest possible elevation of having reached the full shleimus of Vedas Tzadikim. That's the type Tzadik Gomer. Two Lashenas, Tzadik Gomer, Tzadik She, Einoi Gomer. So in Tanya, the type Tzadik Gomer means a complete Tzadik, a Tzadik that he's reached the highest target in Avedas HaTzadikim itself. So therefore, if we say that the Tzadikim Gemurim Einam Yecholim Lamei in the Mokim of the Bali Tshuva, Mokim meaning the Madrega, then that indicates a hefresh, a difference, but Ein Areich Mamish. So we need to understand, what is the Inyan Bazeh? Why would it be that about Tshuva, and therefore Rabbi Yochanan differs with that? He says that the Taicha Bal Tshuva means somebody that he's been Toyim Tam Chait, and he shoved me Averis Biyoda. And therefore it's very difficult to understand why would such a person be incomparably higher than a tzaddik who all of his life he's never been nitshal. I feel in a Dova Kal, and as Mavu in Tanya, I feel in a Dova Kals of different Seifrim, what even a Beinun is not nitshal with them. It's coming for coming, a tzaddik. So therefore brings the Rebbe, he says, Ve'isha b'zoya hatam al zeh. In other words, the intelligent reader immediately is stirred with the shaila, why would Bali Tshuva be probably greater than a Philip Tzadikim Gemurim? What's the beer of it there? So the Rebbe said, it's taki a very puzzling inyan, particularly that there's somebody who disagrees with it, and he's never mentioned in Rov Drush his opinion is not even brought. We just assume with Apshitas that this is the ultimate maskana of the Gemara. They said, the Rebbe, what is the time al zeh? So he said, the Zohar says, Isa b'Zohar tam al zeh, Mishum the Bali Tshuva mashkin le b'cheila yatir. He said, because the Bali Tshuva literally draw down the Eibishter, mashkin le. That's from Lashon limshoch, or Lashon hamshoch, to draw down or to pull. They literally draw down the Eibishter, or they draw the Eibishter out of himself, as you might say. B'cheila yatir, with a much greater power. Cheil is from the Lashon Chayil. In the Lashon Hazeh it means koyach, or oiz. B'cheila yatir, with a greater koyach. Meaning that Einachanami, the tzaddikim, are also mamshik the Eibishter. They're also bringing the Eibishter Kaviyov into Gilui. They bring him literally out of his helem into Gilui, But the greatness of the Bali Tshuva is that they bring a much greater derivation and gilui of Elikus through their effort. So if you look carefully, that's a Gemara, it's a Zohar rather in Pasha Chai Sora. It's very interesting how the Zohar gets under over there, the whole comparison with the Aveda of Avram Avinu, with the Aveda from Sari Imeinu. It starts off there with the different Ramozim in the Psukim, where they talk about the lifetime of Sari Imeinu and the number of years and the Ramozim and those numbers, etc. And then the Gemara gets onto this Indian of Bali Tshuva, and it's mashma that a Bali Tshuva, Dafi, because he was in a Mokim Rochik, he was in a distant place. And in the Hanami he was literally thrown away into what you might call a out-of-the-way place, like the Alter Rebbe in Perek Zion in Tanya. He brings the Moshe of somebody who was in a desert or in a thirsty place. And coming back to Kedusha is like he's strive and he's running for water and running to survive, as you might say. Yeah, therefore, that tremendous yearning and urge and drawing, as it's called over there, that draws from Elikus and from the Eibishter a much greater, powerful derivation of his Gilui than Tzaddik. That's the implication over there in the Lashon of the Zohar HaKodesh. So the Lefizeh is that we're talking about when we say the word Bal Tshuva, that somebody that he was even in what you might call a Mokim Eipach to Kedusha. He was somebody, he began his, what you might call his run in a matzav where he was very distant from the Inyan Kedusha. And that's what the implication of the Zohar Kodesh is. And therefore, since he had to make such a tremendous effort to get back into, or to bring himself near to the Inyan of Kedusha, therefore he brings down a much greater Gilu Elikus based on the immeasurable effort what he made. Well, if he said the Zohar Kodesh takes the Inyan more or less kipshute, that a Bal Tshuva, like I mentioned, came from a distant place. Over there in the Gemara, the Mashur, he says that the whole thing doesn't make any sense al pi ha-seichel. Einu miskabel ha-seichel, as is of the Mashur, that somebody who was a Baal of Veda and he did things which are not Beseda, al pi Torah. Maybe dvarim mamish loy Beseda, and all of a sudden he comes back and he does tshuva to rectify and to correct what, and all of a sudden we make a tremendous, what he might call in inverted commas, hero of him, and he becomes so immeasurably elevated that he's even greater than tzaddikim gemurim with all their lives. They've been poirish mi'inyane aveda betachlis aprecious, and they're not shaykh chas v'chol to any Indian which is not according to Ratzon Hashem. So therefore the Mashal says we have to say, and he's medactic in a certain losh in the Gemara over there, that it means people that, considered maybe sinning but never actually did it. Or for somebody who mamish sinned and then he came back, he couldn't possibly be greater than a Baal, than a Tzaddik. He's got this, what you might call, unfortunate stains on his record. So how's he going to literally even rival the Tzaddik Gomer? How much more so surpass him and be incomparably higher than him? As is of the Mashur. But however, that's what it brings the Zohar. If we look at the Zohar Kodesh, it would appear that we are talking about something that was very distant. And Dafki, because of that, the coming back to the Mokim HaKedusha and entering it with a full shleimus of Kiyum HaTorah Mitzvahs from there on, well, that's a tremendous, unbelievable effort. Therefore, that draws down also a much greater, stronger Gil Elam. So the Rebbe Ulachayra ain't a mover. Now, when the Rebbe says not to be understood, we're going to deal with the in more al derech hasidus, v'apnimius, not so much but derech haposhet like we have up till now. Ulachayra said ain't a mover. V'harei tzadikim gemurim avidasam u'b'chinas tainuk or achmi be'etzem nishmosa. He said, what do you mean when you say a tzaddik gomer? Somebody whose service to the Eibishter is in a form of tainug atzmi. In other words, the whole koyach tainug of a tzaddik has been completely conquered, and he experiences a tainug of his very essence, the very essence of his neshama. Is how they call it, goes out with tainug to the Eibishter, shehu bi'ava rabba b'tanugim lihisaneik al havaya. What's going on? The famous Indian, what the Alter brings in Tanya Perek Tes and Yud, that the type of ava with the tzaddikim gemurim feel is ava b'tanugim. It's called over there ava b'tanugim, meaning that all feelings and all expressions of any form of enthusiasm or nearness or closeness or hisayrus or awakening or whatever you call the Indian from Av or in their neshamas is all completely and utterly conquered by the koyach hatainug, to the point that their whole longing, their whole enthusiasm, the whole power of their neshamas is only in going further and further in tainug to the Eibishter. And like he brings Lihisanik al Havaya, so that's a posik that is quoted Beneged to Shabbos, Oz Tisanik al Havaya. It's one of the psukim we say on Shabbos before Kiddush. In other words, you have to be Misanik al Havaya. So when we say Misanik al Havaya, there's even a beer in Siddur that means that the tainug is so high that it even goes higher than the Shem Havaya. Al Hashem, he goes up to such madregas of the etzem tainug of the Eibishter, it's even higher than the Shemesh, even the Shem Havaya. Misanik, until he comes to a state of B'chinas Klois HaNefesh, Mamish, till he's in a state of expiry of his soul altogether. In other words, as far as he's concerned, he would just go out completely to the Eibush, and he'd leave the goof behind with the whole reason. We're going to see shortly the Rebbe puts a lashon here, which is connected with the Bnei Aaron, the Nadav Avihu, the two Bnei Aaron, but they went into the Kodesh HaKadoshim and they just kept going, and they just went up, and then the Shomas went out, but Klois HaNefesh to the Eibishter. So he says that a tzaddik gomer bi'amitiyus hamadrega, emes a tzaddik gomer. That's why he feels the whole time that he feels this unbelievable tainug in Elikus, to the point that his nefesh is just expiring and going out. So the Rebbe said, can you imagine a madrega higher than that? That's what he brings in Perek Nun. If you look in Tanya in Perek Nun, that he brings that the Mr. Tzaddikim are just going out altogether, and their whole avoida, if we call it avoida, the whole way that they go against themselves, well, that's what it means. Avoida is they tafki come back down into the body. That's their way of making what you might call breaking themselves. That's the Indian of his kafir by an Mr. Tzaddik, that he comes back down into the body, and that's what he brings over there in Perek Nun, the Alter Rebbe, that the avodah, the only form of avodas Hashem by such a tzaddik is what we call shoy, because he wants rotzoi, he just wants to go out altogether, and the whole avodah of his is only leading from shoy to come back into the body. Because mitzadi etzem hanevi, the whole neshama, the whole inyona, is in this tremendous tainug and aliyah above the Shem Havaya with klois hanefesh, the expiry of the soul altogether, until it becomes a shaila. How's he going to remain down here in the body, and how is he going to remain in the world? So there was a Rebbe shezeh magia b'vadai b'chol pnimius nafsho mamish ad kloiso. He said, this is zicher that reaches all the madregas pnimius of the nefesh. It can't say, well, it's only one part of him she feels that, but another in he's much more, how they call it, quiet and balabati. We have to say that no, that if he reaches such a feeling and such a av of tanugim, then that conquers all the aspects of his soul, to the point that the whole soul with all of its madregas, is the etzem neshama, the highest madrega in the neshama, is in a state of klois. Tzaddik wants to go out and just be absorbed mamish into Elokus. But that's the Indian of klois from Russian kiloyin, meaning expiry or going out altogether. So I mean that's a pretty amazing description. That's a tzaddik gomer. Hadikot, that's ordinary schor by a tzaddik gomer. That's the way he lives. That's the way he feels. So that was it. The Rebbe, it's not understandable. What's this Indian at a Baal Tshuva being able to be greater than that? Bali Tshuva, Mashkin Lei, B'chele Yatir. Why is it that the Bali Tshuva, they draw down the Eibush with an even greater koyach? That's the way we're assuming that's the final shot of the Gemara. Says, how is it they're able to draw the Eibush down even greater? The mashma koyach chazak yoter. It's with a tremendous power that they draw down the Eibush, even a more greater power than mi'av rabba b'tanugim the tzadikim gemurim that they managed to generate, and what you might call arouse a certain type of power, and a koyach with the Eibush can't resist it. It draws out the Eibush even more than the tzaddikim do with their klois hanefesh mamish to the Eibush being as they are, tzaddikim gemurim v'haloi. So you might say, well, what is the answer? Somebody that's in like the Alter Rebbe says over there in Perek Zion in Tanya, somebody who realizes that he's in a place of thirst, and he's in a state of a desert, of Eretz Tzia, of Oyef, as he brings over there Li Moyim, there's no way to continue, as you might call it, to exist. That causes an arousal of the etzem of the nefesh, a very essential being of a man. More, and therefore he sort of understands that it's either nefesh or completely nothing. In other words, he understands that it's either life of kedusha or no life. Lagami the meaning from others, rachamoni nitva. And therefore he runs with a tremendous power of his whole being in order, as it were, to perpetuate, to keep going his being. Otherwise, his whole being isn't gonna be there. And that's an inyan which arouses the etzem and touches deep in the etzem more than the inyan from avarabba b'tanugim by the tzaddikim. Haloi gam b'tzaddikim avoidei be'etzem nishmosam canal. Just like we said, that tainug also involves all of their etzem. You can't say that he's more involved with his etzem than what the tzaddikim are, because their tanugim also involves every aspect of their soul, every shaylik pnimi of their neshama, like we just pointed out. You can't say, well, that's more etzem than what that is. Elawat then, when you begin thinking about it, you begin sort of balancing it in your mind, then there is something more, what you might call intense, or something more demanding and what you might call drastic about longing of the Baal Tshuva to get back to the Mokim HaChaim, to which, as it were, save his whole soul and be that's obviously a form of desperate running and desperate drawing into a certain inyan, more than somebody who's involved with the whole inyan of Tainug, and albeit that's a very great involvement even of the etzem, but it's like a difference in what you might call intensity, or a difference in the drasticness of the Gilui. So in the Chanama, we're going to see as we go along that's the way we begin to differentiate between the two inyonim. So the Rebbe says that that's also a inyan van etzem nishmosa. Achar inyanu hine yadua bapirush mimamakim krosicha Hashem. But there's a pasuk in Kapitel Kuf Lamed in Tehillim that's literally from the depths, literally from the depths of the depths. Literally, I have called to the Eibishter. Mimamakim Krosicha Hashem, and everybody is familiar with during the Seres Mechuva, we say that chapter, the Tilim, that capital after the whole Psuki de Zimra, after Birchas Ishtaba, before the Kaddish, before Birchas Krishma, we say that, meaning that capital has got a definite shayches to the avodah of the Ser Shemei Tshuva. In other words, it's a preparation for the Inyan of Yom Kippur, which is a very proud madrega in Tshuva, as we just mentioned a few lines back. So it says the Rebbe, what's this Inyan from the word mimamakim krosicha? Because the word for depth in Lashon Kodesh is omek. Omek means, in other words, omek is a noun, and amok is an amok is an adjective. In other words, amok means deep, and omek means depth. So, if I wanted to say that I'm calling to the Eibishter from depths, then I should have said mi omek ani korel Hashem, mi omek, from the depth. Yeah. Why is it written mimamakim? In other words, we've got here two mems. We've got two mems that have added themselves to the root word ayin mem kuf, which is the root word for the word depth, deep, and we see mimamakim. So the biur is that if you turn the word, if you put a mem at the beginning of the word, and you say mamak, one thing, then you mean in profundity itself, which is omek. By putting that mem at the beginning and turning it into the word mamak, then you've made it as a word deeper than omek. You've made in omek for omek. You know, mimak is like turning it in the union of depth, kufa, into a deep depth, into a depth in a depth. So that's the word mamak on its own. And then you've got here another one. You've got mimamakim. You've got from the depths of the depths. From the depths of the depths of the depths. In other words, you've got two mems. So the two mems, they add a tremendous profundity into the whole concept, which is anyway depth in Belavok. In its own right, it's anyway depth. That's what it means in the simple sense. So that was those two mems, well, they alter the whole word and they make it a very, very profound concept in deep. Mimamakim krosicha. So, particularly as the word mem, as the well-known, indicates a very high madrega, as put down in certain places, that mem is indicative of higher than the Esesphiras, it's indicative of keser, of ukuru, or sometimes bina. We say ben arboim labina, it's put down in Pirkei Avos, and when you reach 40 years, you're supposed to already get bino, you're supposed to have a lot of bino, more bino than what you had before you were 40, etc., etc., ben arboim labina. So it's put down in Shvatim that Maila of Bina contains in itself the Pnimius, which is Keser. The Pnimius, if you don't mind, put your down, that the Pnimius of Bina is really Keser, as we mentioned already on a number of occasions, because the Emes Tainug is Davki in Bina. So therefore, we see that Moshe Rabbeinu was our boim yoim al Har Sinai. His whole Kabbalah Satira took him 40 days with a teaching from Mem. And then we see that he had to go up again onto the mountain. And the Ikir, the time that he received the Torah, was another Mem, that was the last 40 days. In the middle 40 days wasn't so much a for learning, but a for Bakosha's Shlicha. He begged for forgiveness for the Chaytaego and the Gunta Arichas. However, we see that there was also two mems in connection with the union for Kabbalah's Torah, but that's the union for Ben Arboim Labina, or in Bina Gufa, the Pnimius V'Atzmius, which is the union for Shmara Aridin HaKeser. So therefore, if we're going to say that it's written Ma'amakim with two mems, then that means that in the union for Keser, In other words, Lamaila, even than Bina itself, now the very essence, Pnimis of Bina, we've got, as it were, two levels. One level of Keser, which ain't Nachanam against Shishat to Chochma Bina, and then there's another level, which is Lagamre Lamaila Mizeh. Therefore, he said, Mima'amakim Korsicho Hashem, the Mem Ho'alif, the Ma'amakim, Upkinas Eimek the Keser Sheba Keser, Shalamayla Mi Beis Oimkim, the Keser Sheba Chochma O Bina. Who Anikra Oimko de Oimko. In other words, that the Rebbe teaches the two mems. The first mem is Einochanami, does the Keser Mamish. Or be in Keser Gufa, does the Keser Sheba Keser. In other words, we know that we got two madrigas in Keser. We have Shitanius Keser, which is Arik, and Pnimis Keser, which is Atik. We had them at great length earlier here in the Maimah. So therefore, the Keser Sheba Keser is Atik, and in Atik Gufa, Pnimius Atik. So that's one mem, and then the other mem is the union of Keser, how it's shot to Chochma and Bina. In other words, the union for Atik, how it's, we saw, is in Pnimius, Abahu Pnimius Atik, we saw how Keser's Nimshach into Pnimius Chochma, and from there it's Nimshach into the Bina, and like we said, in Bina there's all the Akili of Keser, Mitzat Madrikas Bina, how it's Mekabel from Chochma, and so on, and like we saw earlier, there's a union from Tainu Ga'achmi, how it's nonetheless Murkav, Murgash in Chochma and Bina. That's Kira, the Tainu Ga'achmi relates to the Moki Bashurish of Torah, what that's union for Chochma. So there the Rebbe comes out, if he says, the two mems are union from Atik, Mamish, and then the union from Arich, or upon him, the union from Keser, Nimshach, and Shai to Chochma and Bina. In other words, it's the union of the Shor Sharishan of Torah and Hasogas of Torah, how it's called in Keser. But those are the two madrigas of Oinek Poshet Mamish, Oinek Amurgash, like we saw earlier. Those are those two in Yonim. So he says, Shazel Babali Tshuva Amitim Davko. He said, well, that level is Davka from people that they're Bali Tshuva Amitiyim. And notice he puts in the word Amitiyim. Because a Baal Tshuva can be somebody that he's not 100% a Baal Tshuva Amiti, because Einochanami he did Tshuva, but he still likes to, keep certain things in his pocket. And Einochanami, he did Tshuva, but there's certain things that he would still like, that nobody interfere with them, and this is my little part, my little deal, and so on and so forth. So the Rebbe said you got to be a Baal Tshuva Amiti. You got to sign off all. You got to be completely. Ozev et kol advarim, a Baal Tshuva Amiti, davke she'ein ze b'yecholos hatzadikim agimurim. He said it's not even in the yecholos, it's not in the ability of the tzaddik gomer to reach such a level. So that's the statement of policy. Now we're going to sort of get down into detail and to see how it works. In other words, the tzaddik gomer, he's Ava Rabba B'tanugim. Well, that expression Ava Rabba B'tanugim is a little bit interesting. We won't go into that because in Tanya the Alter Rebbe doesn't call Ava B'tanugim Ava Rabba, he just calls it Ava B'tanugim. One place he does say Ava Rabba Mizu Shu Ava B'tanugim, but that's more like a comparative word. And there's a whole big discussion. The Alter Rebbe himself in Torah about that in Parsha Vayichi, where the Alter Rebbe goes into delicate differences between Ava Rabba and Ava Tanugim. But anyway, Ava Rabba B'tanugim means a tremendous, unlimited Ava. He puts in the word Rabba to stress the greatness of it, not so much the specific madriga. And now he goes on to say that the tzaddikim have all those miles, but the Baal Tshuva has the mile from the two mems of Mimamakim Krosichor, which he goes dafki into a union of Oimek, profundity, and in that itself, Oimek of Oimek, Oimko di Oimko. So now, in order to understand that, Hinei Shorish Nishmas HaTzadikim. Here it's interesting. The Rebbe says that the shoyrish, the very root from whence the neshamas of the tzaddikim derive. Hu b'chinas tainuk aposhut shebechokma u bina u midas de atzilus. V'gam l'mayla mizeh b'shorosh harishoin hu b'chinas shashuim ha'atzmim shebechokma yiz ora. In other words, it's on the tzaddikim are called b'derech klau neshamas da atzilus. Rav tzaddikim, or what he calls them over here, gedolim, tzaddikim gemurim, they are neshamas da atzilus. Well, atzilus is mamish alakus, and it's cholila, not something separate. It's not a separate oilon. It's all mamish alakus. And so over there, every Indian is miyuchet betachlis iyu v'chayehu chad v'yivaga kamoi chad. Both the oilers and the kelim are all betachlis hayichud in Achilas, because it's all, anyway, Balavachi, it's all Elakud. Yet ever the Tzaddikim, they derive from the level of Achilas, and their Inyan is Tainug, on a very high level, but it's somehow connected to Chochma Ubina and Afilu Midas, because Avo, V'yira, they are Midas. And since they experience Avo, then it must in some way be connected even to the Midas, but how they are in that Atzilus. Now, if we go even higher than that, and we go into Tainug itself, not into the spheres how they are in Atzilus, but only into Tainug, that's what he says, L'mayla mizeh b'shorosh harishoin, azu b'pina shashuim ha'atzmim. Well, that's the Avis is very delicate Tainug in his own atzmus, but shebechokmasa yizbarach. In other words, it's how we saw earlier, that the Eibishter is Misanig, but in such a way that he's already made place for the Inyan from Torah, which is the Inyan from Chochma, the Shorosh of Torah, and it's Inyan being Be'ikar Chochma, so that will be a tremendous tainug within Hashem, but it's a tainug which unites with the Inyan from Torah, with the Inyan from Chochma. So he said that's where the neshamas of the tzaddikim derive from. And therefore, since they derive from a level where the atzmus of the Eibishter, how it expresses itself in his tainug, is nonetheless connected, and it's that different of his tainug which is giving place to already Chochma, to the beginning of Chochma, which is Chochma Satoira, and Mamera Bina, which is the Hemshech from that, and even into the Midas of Av V'yira, Lo yuchlu atzadikim gemurim lagia gamba v'rabba b'tanugim shalahem, even with this tremendous ava of tanugim that they have between shir poshut, in a state of shir poshut. That means a simple song. That was that's an expression used instead of was brought down in the previous line which we learned here. The Indian from this what's called shir poshut, and then a shir kaful, which is a double shir, even a shir mishulash, how do you call it, a threesome shir. So shir poshut means a song that has literally no combinations like music or tamim or things of that nature. It's called a song because it's the aliyah and going out of the neshama to Elokut. We see in this week's parsha, for example, we have Oz Yoshia Moshe and Israel, when they saw the tremendous ness of Kriyas Yamsu, which Omein Keni Hirodzim, we should be zeichet to see such nisim. And even the Mailam in nisim Kriyas Yamsu, take of miyad mamish. Auch upon him that immediately they experienced that tremendous ness, and it's written Oz Yoshia Moshe and Israel, that they sang a song. So it's brought down, and so they saw such a tremendously high level of Kila Elakus that they went out of their neshamas. They went completely out in a form of aliyah, with dveikus, and that's called a shir. And so when do you sing? When do you really give forth? I am a say Indian of shir, when you're in such a state of going beyond your normal koichos. Therefore, the Rebbe Marash said that the Indian from shir is keser shebenefesh. It's like the crown of the soul. It's like the going out when you can no longer talk in ordinary dibur, and it's impossible to bring things. You express it to a inyan for shir. Aber in shir gufa, there's like shir and they've got words and they've got little movements to them and tunes and all sorts of inyanim. Then there are higher shirim, that don't have words. They're just certain movements of melody or tnuas, as they call movement. And then there's a higher form of shir, which is even higher than that, where it's just the going out of the neshama into Elokus Mami. He said the tzaddikim, emes the tzaddikim gemurim, they all by shir poshet. They're just inyan from klois. What this inyan from klois is shir poshet, just going up without any more, not even having any musical movement, as you might say, within the whole inyan, but just going up completely into Devekes with the Eibishter. So the tzaddikim gemurim, they hold by that inyan from shir poshet. So he said, Bashir Pashut, the Batanugish and begin Shir Pashut, Oi Basimcha shall Torah o mitzvahs. Or it sometimes can be in the inyan of Simcha b'Torah and mitzvahs. Not so much an inyan for Shir, or Shir is the inyan for going out altogether, but it can be something connected with the actual action of Torah and mitzvahs. Well, that's the inyan of Simcha. So Simcha is like another movement. Simcha is a dafka coming downwards. But we see that when the tainu has reached a very high expression, that sometimes it has what's called a hamshocha into chitzonius or ilah, but that brings a person to simple movements with the body, like rikud, for example, or nachazok inyonim, what they are not carefully expressed inyonim because they come from the inyan of tainug in a very high level, but they're a form of shir, but it's a shir which is recognizable and felt in the world, begoloi. So that's another type of thing, but the shir shumokir of it, and the ultimate, what you might call mashmois of that inyan of a inyan shel simcha, great simcha, and emes simcha, is like another way of expressing the shir of the nefesh, but in a form of coming down into expression in the avodim and the inyanim in this world. Well, that's the inyan from simcha shel mitzvah. That's called simcha shel mitzvah, and that's simcha shel Torah mitzvahs. He said, however, both of them indicate, whether it be in aliyah mamish, which is shir posha, or it's a inyan from simcha. But we see in simcha also that sometimes a person, even though it's come down into hamshocha in the world, he can be so affected by his simcha that he also doesn't know where he is anymore. He loses his whole awareness of things around him, because the moki of that simcha is this tainug posha, as we mentioned before. It's in another expression. So those inyonim, whether it be in the inyan from av tanugim, or whether it be in the inyan from simcha shel Torah mitzvahs in a very profound way, well, they go back rak l'moket chaitzvom horishaim. Well, they go back in a very high oifan, but they go back only to their mokeh of their, what you might call, of their, or how do you call it, their chop from the block. Chaitzvom, it means makoyah chaitzvom means when how do you call it, a quarry, a place where you chop off the rock originally from its original source. So the neshama is described as having a makoh chutzpah, what nowadays they call a quarry. I think it's called a tzav, but in modern Hebrew it's called a machzor or something. It's from the same word, to cut from the original rock. So that means your shoyrish of your neshama, because it derived from which way the maila. So he says that through that tremendous tainug and that simcha of the tzaddikim, they reach back into their very high level, but it's all connected with the inyan of makoyah chayt from horishain, which is between the tainug ha'achmi shebe helem or achmi de chokma. It's not in the helem ha'achmi of the Eivish himself, but it's in the helem ha'achmi of the beginning of the whole shorish of Torah and mitzvahs, which is chokma. So we see that that's already shuhu nikra between us oineg murgash. That's called oineg, which ultimately it's going to be experienced and felt, because the shorish of the atzmus or oineg has right from the beginning connected with the mokeh of chokma, and therefore he said it comes into a form of Oineg Amurgash, despite the fact that it's a sheer poshut, but the very fact that it's a sheer, well, that indicates that there's some form of awareness and feeling. Yeah, well, that's Oineg Murgash, be'erech, Gabi Amitius, Atzmus, the Ein Seif, Biprinus Tainu Ganelem, Shalamayla Migila, Ze, Shabachachma, the Torah, Akaduma. So he said that's called Oineg Amurgash, compared, be'erech, Lagabe means compared to the Emesa Oyer Ha'atzmus of Ein Seif, in its state of Tainug, Anelam, hidden Tainug, which is Lamayla Migila Shebechachmat of Torah HaKeduma. It's even higher than that Inyan of the Tainug that unites with the Chachma of Torah, albeit Torah HaKeduma. Torah HaKeduma means the primordial level of Torah in its first Madrega prior to its Gilui, but sof it's a level of Gilui compared to Mamish Atzma. Therefore, says the Rebbe, no matter how high the tzaddikim will go with their unbelievable madrigas, they reach a level from whence their neshama is derived, dainu, a form of oinig within, albeit the atzmus, but leaning towards and giving rise to the union of chokhmah and chokhmah the Torah. It's the old saying that how do you call it, the apple never falls far from the tree, is the old saying in the vernacular. In English, since they have this unbelievable tainug in Yonah de Kedusha, and it becomes Ava Rabba B'tanugim or Simcha Gedola in the Inyan of Torah Mitzvah, well, that's because they derive from the Inyan of the very Mokeh of Torah Mitzvahs. That's where the Neshama is derived from. And Mamela with the unbelievable tainug that Hashem feels in the Torah mitzvahs which He gives. But that's literally the shurish of the neshamas, and higher than that they don't go, because you can't go higher than your chip, where you're chopped from, literally. You can't go higher than that, and that's where they came from, Makeh Chutzvah. So I said, the Rebbe Vaharayeh, Shaharei Avidosom, Ubchinas Oineg Murgash. He said it's a form of a feeling, and like you say, as somebody who tasted the Ava B'tanugim, the way they have Ava Elikus, then they wouldn't swap that for anything. That is the most unbelievable form of fulfillment that they could imagine. They wouldn't want, under any circumstances, to how do you call it, overlook that for any other form of oineg. That they are feeling something, and it's impossible for them to ever forego that, or in any way imagine another form of feeling. So therefore, sof kosof, it's an inyan of murgash. Gam mesirus nefesh shalahem. He said, even their mesirus nefesh, what the tzaddikim have, he said, that's between us klois hanefesh, nachmas roiv tikboidus or ava rabba b'tanugim. He said, when you say that a tzaddik is prepared to have mesirus nefesh, Adonai says he wouldn't care if he went out. He went completely and expired mamish into Elikus, and he would be only too happy about that. It wouldn't bother him. We call that mesirus, nefesh. He said, oh, but that's a mesirus nefesh, which is because of machmas roiv tikboirus avarabba, from the tremendous victory, overcoming power of the ava rabba bata nugim. And then he says, Barevus, Mesikus, Yedidus, Ois, his Kashrus, Nishmosom, Belakim, Chayim. The Rebbe said that comes from the sweetness, Arevus, Mesikas also means sweetness. No, Arevus is a more delicate form of sweetness. Yedidus, like friendship and devotion. Ois, power of these Kashrus of their Neshama. Now, expressions like that are rather rare in this, but that's a quote. It's almost like a quote. There's a very famous Erech Chaim HaKodesh, or the Erech Chaim HaKodesh, at the beginning of Pasha Achrei, where it's written that Hashem said to Moshe v'Aaron, Achrei Mois Shnei B'nei Aaron, and he says that you should never do what like they did, you should never go into the Kodesh, but once a year on Yom Kippur there will be this killer, and then the whole tzibur of how it is possible to go into the Kodesh but only be Yom Kippurim and only under certain circumstances with the whole ariches. So the Or HaChaim brings over there that Achrei Moish Shnei B'nei Aaron V'kirvosam Lifnei Hashem V'yomuz, they went close to the Eibush and they died. And he asked the famous question, how can you say they went close to the Eibush and they died? If you get close to the Eibush, that's the end of life. Whatever they close to the Eibush and they died. So he's mad with this whole incident. They were, they had cloys. They just expired. The closer they got to the Eibush, they just went into him almost. They just absorbed into him. And like the little nitzots jumped into the big flame and it was just gone. They just went completely. So he said that there's no man knows how to feel that or can possibly experience that. But it appears that he maybe did have some idea what it's about, because he writes over there all these amazing absolute nouns. There's a whole sentence of nouns. He says Aravus, Masikas, Yedidus, Iskashvus, Isangus, all sorts of amazing absolute nouns describing the type of aliyah that they had when they passed out of their bodies into the Inif and Elikus. So we see from that was Mesirat Nefesh on their part. They said, let's go in and we're not coming back. They didn't want to come back. They didn't know anymore of the whole idea of this world. So that's Mesirat Nefesh. But it's a Mesirat Nefesh based on tremendous sweetness and masikas. And as he writes over there, the Or HaChaim HaKodesh, unless you're able to taste that sweetness, you can never imagine how you could come to a point where you would never want anything else, only just that sweetness, and you just keep going out, and you would never, be able or want to come back. So come to Islam, he said that Emes Tzaddik, his Mesiras Nefesh, is really based on an unbelievable feeling with normal humans, in inverted commas, can never have any idea of what that's really about. He said, Gam Zer Rak B'Finas Oine Gam Murgash B'Nafsho. That's a tremendous oinig, and it's felt. It's felt so profoundly that it conquers all other feelings and all other possible human experiences. And they just say, well, if we got this far, then here we go. It's gone. They couldn't possibly imagine overlooking for a second that unbelievable oinig, and therefore they just don't. They didn't come back. It was just complete absorption into Elikut. That's how the Or HaChaim HaKodesh, that's how he is Mavaya, that Inyan. There's a whole sikha in the Rebbe, HaMashiach, where the Rebbe brings down about the Or HaChaim HaKodesh, how he writes about this Inyan. The Rebbe comments about it that it's a very unbelievable level, Madrega, that you can only describe it. It's impossible really to picture in our minds exactly what was feeling, but the Rebbe said no matter how high that is, that's not the way. He said it's not ultimately what is asked. What is asked ultimately is to come down into the world, become on a sail, and to be in the world and to do what you're supposed to do, etc., etc. So therefore it's a Mesiras Nefesh of a very unusual kind, but it's not the ultimate kavanah. Omar Mera, ein ze beginners is Pyrus Atzmius Anefesh Mamish. So therefore the Rebbe said we have to be metaking slightly what we said before. It's mitzad the etzem Anefesh, but we have to say it's not Mamish, the awakening of the very essence of the soul. He said because sof they are feeling something. And since they're feeling something, there's a what you might call a reward and a self-motivation in the whole thing. That's what's brought down. It's a form, in unbelievable inverted commas, about 6 feet tall. It's a form of self-fulfillment. You can't say that it's just these pilots at the very essence of the soul itself. Because the very essence of the soul, if it were just to go into Elikut, it would just go in without any feeling at all. And on the contrary, it would just move in, and you would just have to follow it because of the etzem, the vakus of the etzem in the etzem. But if it goes in with a whole, what you might call, fanfare of unbelievable feeling, albeit a feeling that no human being can reach, but it is a form of feeling, then it's not ultimately these pilots of the etzema Nefesh Mami. There was a Rebbe, Shalamayla Mizeh, it's not these pilots of the Atzmis Nefesh. Shalamayla Mizeh, who is pilots Atzmis the Bali Tshuva? And now you see him. He said that Mayla Mizeh is the type of his pilots of the Bailite Tshuva, the B'chia Rabo, with an unbelievable weeping. In other words, these tzaddikim, they have avarab. They feel this incredible fulfillment and richness of ava, that they're prepared to overlook everything and give everything away, and they do. But he said the Baal Tshuva, he doesn't feel all that. The Baal Tshuva feels a union of weeping, b'chia, b'chia rabo, with tremendous weeping. Mi umke de umke, that's the two levels we saw before, mi mamakim, mi umke de umke mi kirois haleiv, from the very walls of the heart. In other words, that even the walls of the heart are straying, ad kloisoi mamish, until it goes out, mamish kipshuta. In other words, not klois in the sense of going up into a higher level and just being with the Eibishter, but ad klois, that the nefesh just doesn't want to be anymore in its own self. It just can't stand anymore its own self. It just goes out altogether and loses any, what you might call, awareness of the self at all. In other words, the implication being that those B'nai Aaron, that they had this tremendous kirub to Hashem, it's nonetheless called B'kirvosam Nifnei Hashem V'yomusu. It's called like a collapse. They went up into the front of Hashem, but they died. Meaning that ultimately that's not what Hashem wants, because they would literally come into Hashem saying, oh, here we are, you see, this unbelievable connection, all we want is you. So Kodi Fo would say, oh, Yeshom Alechem, I realize that all you want is me, but why don't you ask what I wanted? So, why didn't you ask what I wanted before? That's one implication. However, by the Bali Tshuva, at the beginning of their Avodah, they don't know of anything. All they know is that it's not good, and therefore they weep. They reason that where they are and what they're involved in, therefore that causes in them an inyan of bechia, until the nefesh can be so affected by that bechia that it can just go into a complete cleanse without knowing where it's going or what it can just get completely and utterly swept into Elokus, but not coming to the Eibishter and saying, oh Shalom Aleichem, here I am, oh, this is my fulfillment, I've come to you, just sweeping up into him without knowing where it's going and without saying Shalom Aleichem b'klal. Klal. And what do we have a dogma for that? Okay, Rabbi Elazar ben Dur Dayo, the famous story of Rabbi Elazar ben Dur Dayo, Yotza Nishmosei Bebechi Ukahaiga Gavna, and similar to that. So everybody's familiar with Rabbi Elazar ben Dur Dayo, because he's brought down in countless places in Siddur, and he's mentioned in Tanya at the end of Perek Mem Vav. Everybody's familiar, no doubt. How the Alter brings him down over there. Of our Rebbeim really were tremendously taken with this story of Rabbi Elazar ben Dayo. But it's a Gemara in Masechta Avodah Zarah, Daf Yutayin. But over there the Gemara tells the story of a guy that his name was not Rabbi Elazar ben Dayo, he was called Elazar. And Durdayo is a name, maybe that wasn't really his father's name, but maybe it was called, Durdayo means dregs, and he called the dregs at the bottom of a pot, In other words, he was called Elazar ben Dur. He was like a son of the dregs, he was into all the grimy business, and he had a particular weakness for that tainim, which ruins many, which tantalizes all of the male species. He was into this whole union with women and so on, and eventually he got to a famous harlot with the whole story, and all of a sudden something happened there, and she said to him, "Oh, you see that?" She said, "That's a sign that you've been refused entry, and you won't make it anymore into the heavenly. You're finished. You're a write-off. As far as the Eibush is concerned, you've had it. And it made such an effect on him that he ran out and he ran into the hills and into the sky and everything. And he asked the heavens, have Rahmanas on him, and they should ask the Eibush to let him in. And they said, listen, we're too busy with our own problems. We've got time to worry about you. There's going to come a point where all the heavens are going to collapse. Well, unfortunately, that's maybe something now. Anyway, they said, we're busy with our own inyanim. And then he said, what about the earth? The earth said, look, I'm concerned with my own inyanim. I got no time for you. And no matter where he turned or whatever, everybody said they can't help him. You've had it, you're a write-off. The Eibush will not let you into his court again. So when he understood that, then he put his head between his knees and he passed out. He just gave out in Neshama, a bechi. He just passed out altogether. And the simple pshat of the Gemara is that he died. So it's a simple pshat. Even though there's maybe in one or two places an implication, maybe he didn't die, but Rov Meforshim, Pirush Pshat, understand that he died. I will teach this out completely. Place HaNefesh Mamish. And that's taken as a dogma of this unbelievable desire of the soul to go back, not being able to get back, yet nonetheless wanting to get back, and literally going out with desire Klois HaNefesh to Hashem, which is this complete loss of all state of Chayim. And that's what done it, where they went and told Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid, they told Rabbi what had happened. And in Rabbi Bocher Rebbe, that Rabbi wept also when he heard it, and he said, Yesh koino elomim b'sho achas, yesh koino elomim b'ribui shonim. That there's some people that they managed to buy their world, they purchased their world in 1 hour, in 1 moment, in 1 kilo move. They purchased their whole world. And he said there's some people that they purchased their world only after a lot of years of effort. The point being, and then even then you can't really tell if it's with all perfection. And they made the Levias, so Rebbe said that they should give him the name Rebbe. They should give him the name Rebbe. They should call him Rebbe. They should call him Rebbe Elazar Ben Dur. Rebbe Elazar Ben Dur Dayo. And there was one out of Basco and said that Elazar Ben Dur Dayo is Muslim L'Chayo Elam Haba. I think it should, anyway, it was Mashman. It was Muslim L'Chayo Elam Haba. He got into Elam Haba, etc. So the big shaila is that if he didn't have Torah mitzvahs and he'd done all these very, very unpleasant fingers with the whole thing, then how did he get in? You've got to have something with which to go. You've got to have all the levushim of Torah and mitzvah. So you know the famous Torah Tzavadavan. This is from the Manigit. It's a bit of a mind-boggling Torah. Where did he get all the mitzvahs? So it's brought down that there was, it's brought down in the Gemara, there was a Kohen Gadol, he was called Yochanan Kohen Gadol. And he served the Eibush for a lot of years. I don't even want to say how long it was. But at the end he became a tzadduki. He turned and he joined the tzaddukim. You know the tzaddukim. He joined up with them. It's written that because of that, they were they were koifrim. Therefore, they took away all of his levushim that he'd earned all the years. They gave him to Elazar Ben Dur. Yeah. Elazar Ben Dur got all those levushim, and that's how he got into Gan Eden. But he got them because of this unbelievable tshuva that he did. This unbelievable tshuva, which is amazing from Bechi. So he'll see then an amazing principle. So he said, well, Ben Dur Daya, she also nishmosim bebechi, ukahai gavna. Yeah, and that's brought down, you should realize, in many, many places. So almost every drush somewhere mentions this Elazar Ben Dur Daya. In other words, he was a big Indian. If the Rebbeim saw in him a symbol of a very great Indian, and they keep mentioning it, sometimes they talk about the miser that happened. Like this, how did he get all the worship, or what was this, what was that? Different in Yonim when I get to this story in the Gemara. Because our Rebbe saw in it the greatness of the power of Tshuva. V'zehu yoisa elyoin mimesirus nefesh te'ava rabo liyisanig al ha'vaya. Said the Rebbe, that's greater. Now this is the Chiddush. Now that's more elevated than the Mesiras Nefesh of the Ava Rabbah or the Tzaddikim, what they are Misanig al Havaya. They give away everything, they just go out to be Misanig on Havaya. And like the Bnei Aaron, that they went out in such a way they never came back. He said that his Mesiras Nefesh was Yoisa Elyon. It was much higher even than the Mesiras Nefesh of the Tzaddikim Gemurim, but they have the senior from Misanig al Havaya. Now that is pretty amazing going to say a thing like that. And I mean, it's mind-boggling. He said that that's Yisrael Elyon from the Mesiras Nefesh. Daharei. He says, Gama Mesiras Nefesh Dahatanugim Aru B'chinas Oinig Murgash. They feel their Oinig, the Tzaddikim Gemara. They experience it. It's impossible to change that. How is it B'Bali Tshuva Hare Adarabah B'chinas Tsar U'Marirus HaNefesh B'Yoisa. He's in a form of pain, tsar, bitterness of the soul, in a much greater way. Shenagei Ba'Imek U'Pnimiyus HaNefesh Mamish Ad Kloisa, to going out, but going out in a different way, and in the opposite way altogether, not from oinig and unbelievable fulfillment, but from immeasurable tsar and how do you call it? Marilas and bitterness, ad kleisa, shezeh magia bi'atzmas ha'nefesh mamish, har bi'yosem mibchinas ha'oinega muriga. He said, K'moy Kain, Lamaila, that's in the nefesh of the other. So he said, K'moy Kain, the way it affects things, Lamaila, Magia Lamaila, b'chinas Tainu gan lelem she'ba'atzmus, she'em bi'yechoilas ha'tzadik, yechoilas. It's not within their capacity of the tzaddikim gemurim lahagir lozeh al yidei ha'av rabba b'tanugim v'al yidei ha'simcha. The Torah, Mitzvah, we point out, it's two different ways of doing it, basically the same thing. He said they can't possibly reach that level. Now in the brackets, we'll see about that in the coming year. Everybody's saying Adma. Well, everybody's saying Adma, because what's going to be with Moshiach? Take it from Yad V'Yad Avin. Maybe it's a little sort of a cold doctor to saying. Anyway, whatever is, we'll deal with the bracket. It's also fascinating. We'll do it out of the coming episode. Over here presents itself the Shaila, the attentive reader. Who said that Tsar Marilas is incomparably greater than fulfillment and oineg? In other words, there's an Indian here in what you might call the negativity, the Tsar, and the bitterness, and the distance, the feeling of the richut, which causes this Tsar. But that's greater and more powerful, both in the nefesh of the person, and in a way it's poiler. Lamaila bizin and even einaroi. I mean, it's in an incomparably different level, because this Elazar ben Dudaya, he was called Rebbe Elazar ben Dudaya. Rebbe said that his funeral they should call him Rabbi Elazar ben Dudaya. In other words, he came to a higher level just with that bechi bilvad, that mariras and shaf oimek v'noiro, or that reaches in a profounder level than the Indian von oinek. So we need to understand what is the Tchuna Pnimius, what is the Indian von Tsar, what is its greatness, why should it be even from Mariras that somehow or another pierces all the what you might call the Masachim and all the curtains and all the Madregas, and it pierces up into the Indian Ha'achmas, Eizim Maila Yeshpa, B'Tsar Mariras. And Kilo, we see that's almost like we're saying, that's the ultimate shleimas that could be demanded, because the tzaddikim gemurim einem yecholim la moi. They can't stand in that madrega. So we've got to be misbein, and we'll see. The bracket just says that the tzaddikim gemurim can come to that type of level, but not through the tainul they have on what they have, but another form of tainul that they can have. They can maybe reach that level. That's the bracket. But nonetheless, in simple terms, the difference remains. So we have to say that oineg causes like a israchabus. The more you become full of learning, the more you expand and the more all your efforts go out and they all develop. And so that opens up tremendous gateways which have unlimited abilities to form your connection with Telekut. But if it's a inyan from tsar, then the inyan from tsar is what we call kibbutz. When you're in terrible pain and upset, everything sort of quetches in. And that's what causes the tears. It's brought down and says that quetches at the moyach, so the moyach can't take it and it just gives out water. Because it can't take the tremendous kibbutz on the brain. That's why he cries. It follows the he said that the inyan from kibbutz, which is tsar, well, that's got some sort of ability to force issues. It sort of quetches in yonim, that turns what you might call a form of breaking of all the gateways, and you go up into a pneumis that the tainus not able, because the tainus is like any goodness and expansion, and maybe you sort of absorb things that you get up to things you would normally go. Although the infant tsar and maridas is like forming a sharp point, almost like a piercing power that breaks through things, that sort of splits them open with a tremendous power and gets you in, like the famous expression in the Gemara, dochach v'niknas. There was a certain person, they wouldn't let him into the base of Medrash, and dochach, and he pushed and he got in. So dochach v'niknas. We have to work out what is the view of the inyan here. Once we understand that, we'll understand what Rebbe wants, that we should say ad motzai, we should be tzuyach on the matzah in the Dvar Malchis in the Sikha from Toshin and Beis they wrote down in Pasha Boya, only about Miriam. We said that Miriam, she was Moshe Rabbeinu's sister. She was an Aviyah. So the word Miriam is Moshe Mar, Moshe Mariras. So we see that Tafki Miriam, she was Mar and embittered about the brothers more than other people were. So he brought to all sorts of riots to that. And yet on the other hand, we see that when she got all the other women going, they sang a song. The whole thing was wicked in this week's parasha. There brings a medrash there written that she was like the Goyal, she was like the actual Redeemer, even though the actual Redeemer was Moshe Rabbeinu, because she changed the Marilas into ultimate fulfillment. But she's like the big connecting power, because she felt the bitterness of the God. So when I saw that, I was a little bit relieved. I said, the Rebbe does say that you're allowed to be bitter at the gods. Because, things which you have to get are so terrible, they're so unfathomable, they're so maddening, and I just can't take it, so at least I was a little bit relieved, the Rebbe said that you are supposed to feel Marilas, but you're supposed to turn that Marilas into the ultimate Geula, the ultimate Simcha. Al Yidei, what you'll say, like he says here, Mikira Salev Adma Sai, and then you get even more powerful and you'll say Yechia Melech HaMashiach. Okay, guys.